Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Sustainable UX and Service Design webinar with myself and Mila. Just before we get introductions, just whilst we're waiting for other people to join the webinar, just wanted to make you aware of some of the features of Big Marker so you can kind of get the most of your experience today. What we have available is a chat feature, which you can access, which allows you to just chat with each other, say hello, maybe let people know where you're from, maybe why you've come to the webinar today. There's also a Q&A section that you can use, so you can ask questions for us, which we'll be hoping to answer at the end. And there's also the option to upvote any questions that you find particularly interesting, so we can maybe try and prioritize the ones that we want to try and address during the session. So feel free to make use of the chat and the Q&A. We will be also running some polls. Oh, welcome Ian from Canada. You're winning a prize for further styling so far, so well done you. We will be running some polls later in the session as part of a pop quiz, but I'll activate those at the appropriate time. But in the meantime, feel free to say hello. As we go through the webinar today, feel free to pop any questions in. And at this point, I'll hand over to Mila, and we can start the webinar properly for you.
So good afternoon, everyone. So what are we going to cover today? These are the following bits. Of course, we can't but start with some introductions. Then we'll proceed with speaking, covering a bit of why. It's like the question which we like a lot. Why is sustainable design is important? Then move on to what is sustainable design in our understanding? What part does digital play? And the biggest block of information today would be how can we create sustainable designs, products and services. And we hope to cover that all in 50 minutes, roughly like that. And then we will have the Q&A. So that's the plan for today. And as I promised, a bit of introductions before we dive into our topic. So for some of you, you might not be familiar with Bunnyfoot. I think the majority of the people joining today, you know what Bunnyfoot is about, but just very briefly, we're a group of 27 psychologists, UX researchers, usability specialists, service designers, and we've been here for a while, more than 21 years now, and it's still counting, more than 4,000 projects delivered so far. We have 2 UX labs in Sheffield and in London, not in use at the moment, but we hope we'll be back on track soon. And we have even our own recruitment agency. So for all our projects, we recruit people internally. But apart from the work that we do with clients, we also offer quite a few training courses, like Pete and I, we have our own training courses. So not yet on sustainable design, but watch the space. And also, Bunnyfoot is part of the Sideshow group, which we joined in 2018. So now we work together with the other members of the group on complex project and end-to-end projects. And also, roughly 2 years ago, Pete and I have started the Sustainable Bunnies group. So this is our internal team, sustainable team. And what we do public talks like this one to inspire and motivate more designers to take action to save our planet before it's too late. We write blog posts, so head on our website and you'll see some of the blog posts on the topic. We do some training with our clients and we exchange knowledge. We sponsor industry events like the UX UK Awards, and also check it out. This year we will have, there would be a new Sustainable UX Awards category. So if you're considering, you might join and participate and win the competition maybe. And also, believe it or not, we are working hard on making our own company, Bunnyfoot, as sustainable as possible. So we're all in the same boat, in the same journey. But enough of introductions for the moment. Let's start. And at first, we would like to cover the basics, basically, why we think designing with sustainability in mind is important. So probably, I'm sure you know some of the gloomy statistics, but this one is unfortunately the most recent one, confirming that we shall take more actions and as soon as possible in everything we do. And despite of all the efforts, we are still heading towards the detrimental temperature increase of 3 degrees Celsius. And life for humans, wildlife, and the environments we share is going to get worse, and a lot worse. So the bottom line is we have to stop carbon emissions and to restore the ecosystem as soon as we can. And there are many predictions of the future and how the future life might look like. We particularly like these Arup's 2054 plausible scenarios of the future, ranging from the collapse of our society and the natural systems, that's the bottom left image, on the axis of the planetary health versus societal condition or societal health. And then the best case scenario is those two, society and the planet, living in harmony. That's the top right image. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. It's a fascinating report to read, and I'll encourage you to go and check it out. That might help you inspire others around you and start thinking more about sustainability in the work that you do. But apart from the tragic events, there is another, like, more positive incentive, is focusing on sustainability in design makes good business sense. So doing the right thing for the future of humanity and the environment, you make sure your users stay loyal to your brand, as more and more people, especially the younger generation, they are moving towards more ethical brands. So if you want to guarantee your profitability in the future, you better be sustainable in everything you offer to your users. Also, organizations will be better able to attract and retain staff because people care about the environment, especially the ones who work in organizations that have sustainability as their core value. So it's kind of a win-win situation for everyone. I'll head over to Pete.
Thanks, Mila. So hopefully Mila's set a bit of the scene as to why we need to bother with sustainable design, but it's also important to consider what sustainable design actually means before we start trying to do it. So I guess at a high level, what we could say is that what we're trying to move from is a human-centered design approach, which I'm sure we probably will take at the moment, to thinking of more in terms of an environment-centered design approach. So what these diagrams show you, hopefully, is that what we've been working on historically for a couple of hundred years at least now is that people are in charge of everything else in the environment, and everything's subservient to us, and we can extract as much value from it as we want with no real consequences. But we know now that that's not the case, and what we need to start thinking about is people and humans as an integral part and an equally important part of the environment and all the aspects of nature within it. So what we need to realize is that the designs we need to be heading towards need to be in balance with everything else in the system, not just extracting value and not giving anything back. In a slightly more pragmatic form, if we think about how that works in an organizational context, everyone loves a Venn diagram, and here's ours. But essentially what we're trying to do with sustainable design is find out that sweet spot where we can satisfy organizational goals, the needs of the environment, and also the needs of people. So that would be typically our users or our customers. But crucially, what this diagram is trying to show is that we need to treat the environment as a key stakeholder as part of that process. So we'll get on to ways of how we can tackle that later in the webinar, but just as a few kind of kick-off questions to consider, you might be thinking along the lines of, what's our impact on the environment, or what's the carbon footprint of our products and services, and how can we minimize that impact? So broadly speaking, that's what we consider sustainable design to be. But there's obviously, given we're working in digital, and I'm sure many of you are as well, we need to consider what part does digital play in all of this in terms of its contribution to the situation and where we can get out of it. So to help provide a bit of context for the digital contribution, what we're going to do is play a little quiz. So I've got a few questions for you, which you'll be able to answer via the polls in a second. But the first question I want to ask you is, what has the larger carbon footprint, the internet or Canada? So if you bear with me 1 second, I will just get that going. So if you head over to the polls section in the chat window, you should hopefully be able to see in a few seconds time that question launch.
There is a pop-up now, so they should see a
Perfect.
pop-up
Okay.
on the screen.
Great, I can see the answers flooding in. Okay, still got a few responses flooding in, so give it a few more seconds. Super. Okay, so the results of that poll are that 97% of you think that the internet has the larger carbon footprint, and you guessed correctly that sadly the internet does have a larger carbon footprint than Canada. Which goes to show that we're not talking about small change here. Digital does have a massive carbon footprint. So next question, which is heavier, the adult population of Europe or the amount of e-waste out there around the world at the moment? So next poll coming your way in a second. So that should be popping up for you any second now. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So again, looking at the results for that, we have 95% of you saying that the global e-waste weighs more than the adult population of Europe. And again, it's a shame to say that that is also the case. So I guess what we either need to do is reduce the amount of e-waste or start eating more pies just to tip the scales in the better direction. So third question, what has the larger carbon footprint, watching online videos or the carbon output of Spain? So again, that should be live for you in a second. So I can see the responses flooding in here. Okay, I think we're pretty much there. So let's close that poll. So again, majority of you now saying 86% of you saying that watching online videos has the largest carbon footprint. And again, you would be right. So final question, just to help I put a bit of context to the digital contribution to the world's carbon footprint. What do you think has the larger carbon footprint, a Google search or boiling a kettle? So last question coming up here. What has the larger carbon footprint, a Google search or boiling a kettle? Okay, looks like there's only a few more responses to come in. Okay, right. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and let's take a look at the results. So, according to the results, 83% of you, 61% of you think that a Google search has a larger carbon footprint than Born in the Kettle. So there's a bit more of an even split there compared to the other questions, which is kind of good in a way, because it's a bit of a trick question, because basically depending on what you're searching for on Google and how much water is in your kettle, etc., they can be pretty much equivalent. So it's a bit of a sneaky question in there. But hopefully it just goes to again to prove that whether you're talking about macro scale or micro scale of digital, that there is still a not insignificant carbon footprint attached to digital. So it's worth knowing the wider context of where that carbon footprint can come from in terms of digital. So it's not just about the carbon footprint associated with your website and your apps. It also includes the resources and the people that you need to produce those digital products and services. It also includes the energy and the associated carbon footprint of the data centers where all that stuff is hosted, as well as all the infrastructure that is required to transmit data to and from your users, as well as your users actually using your digital products and services. So the carbon emissions associated with their devices, for example. So again, just to ram home, the carbon footprint of digital is significant, and it's something that needs to be tackled as part of a global solution for the environmental crisis. But the good news is that it's within our power and within our capabilities to solve this problem. And it's so fantastic that so many of you have come along to this webinar today, because hopefully you can be part of that solution too.
All right, so now let's move to our biggest block, the one covering different ways how we can create sustainable services, products, and designs. And that would be the 7 areas that we're going to cover. And when I say we, I mean UX designers, UI designers, service designers, basically anyone involved in design. So the areas where we can bring change, not only observe, be in a side, but we can step in and motivate others. So the 7 ones include business operations and supply chains, engaging with your users, defining business model, redefining or changing, updating the business models, services, and product propositions that we work with and we design. Collaboration bit, designing with sustainability in mind, different tricks and techniques, and sustainable design maturity and being a champion, as well as we will cover some resources to help you out on your journey. But before we look into those areas, I want to say a few words on corporate social responsibility and zero carbon targets. So usually when you hear the word sustainability in business, the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is corporate social responsibility, such as sponsoring different campaigns like World Wild Fund initiatives or Greenpeace campaigns. And almost every company these days has a dedicated sustainability section on their site. Well, but in real life, environmentally driven individuals, and I mean us designers in all sorts and forms and varieties that we are in companies, hardly ever speak to corporate social responsibility teams or comms teams. And it's really hard to join efforts because the departments, especially in big organizations, still work in silos. So what is left for us, proactive people, designers, is to roll up our sleeves and to collaborate with each other. So we are going to provide some bits and pieces, tips and advice how to do that. And we will highlight the areas we believe you can make change happen. And the other thing which I would like to mention is that the world is transitioning to a zero carbon economy. So more than 1,000 companies now worldwide, including a lot of UK companies, as you can see in the screenshot that we took, they are leading to the zero carbon transition, and they're putting their targets of reducing the CO2 emissions. So this is the website, the sciencebasedtargets.org. That's an initiative run by United Nations Global Compact and Worldwide Fund and World Resources Institute and CDP, so big environmental companies. And the reason why we put it here is, what are your organization's environmental targets? Are you aware of that? Maybe if you're not, because there's so many UK companies that did their pledges back in 2016, 2017, and there's more and more coming these days. So what we want you to do, if you're not aware, if you don't know internally what is happening, that's a very good site to go to check, to find out, and to use it in your work. In everything you do, you can refer to that and use it in decision-making process, or like when you're working on proposals, or when you're working on briefs, or when you're making decision in your design decision. So it's a good thing to use, like a little thing to back up your decisions, maybe more sustainable decisions. And here's an example of Sky, their net zero carbon 2030 strategy, and they've also did their pledge last year, if I'm not mistaken. But this is the strategy that they've announced last year in February. Not every company is as vocal and as explicit about their environmental actions, so we are going to use this plan and this strategy in some of our examples of the areas that we are going to cover, just to illustrate where things could change and how we can implement those changes. Okay, so without further ado, let's start off. And the first area is the business operations and the supply chain. And if we use our example of Sky, we highlight it with arrows, like the key areas where they change in the way they operate their business. So there's quite a lot of things. They make every Sky original production and TV show net zero carbon. They're converting their fleet to be green fleet, to become green fleet. They're building new studios which are sustainable and using renewable energy, and they're working with their suppliers to go zero. Here is an example of the studio, the new film and TV studio powered by renewable energy, so that their production and broadcasting facilities are all naturally ventilated and free from producing any CO2. Well, at this point you might think, it's out of my zone of influence. That's not the decisions I make. Or you might be not a senior director or part of the board to make decisions like this, but there are some sustainable changes that you can bring where you work within the team. And you can choose green suppliers to work with. Big part of having more sustainable design is using sustainable partners and software platforms and hardware as well. So here are the questions that you can discuss with your team and decide where you can change the supplier. So you can look at your current energy suppliers, how green they are. You can check your hosting providers, data centers and iCloud services, and maybe some other software service providers. If they use renewable energy, you can investigate into that. How environmental friendly are your hardware suppliers? And can you bring any sustainable approaches into how your business department team operates? So these are all different levels that you can look at. And to find out how green your suppliers are, software, hardware, you can head to these resources and these lists like CDP A list and certified B corporations, and to check and choose the ones that use renewable energy.
Okay, so moving on to a topic that is possibly sort of more, I guess, common ground for people that are going to be on this webinar today, including myself, Amelia, and this is engaging with your users. So in that earlier Venn diagram, I said that what we're trying to achieve is that sweet spot where we can satisfy the needs of the business or organization, our users and the environment. So obviously we need to still think of users as a key part of this process. So what you can do when you're starting to engage with users on this topic are ask them questions, or ask yourselves questions about, what do customers want from us with regards to sustainability? Obviously you're still going to be in the business of trying to deliver good user experiences to people through your products and services, but there's the opportunity now to think, okay, well, if we're going to start becoming this more sort of sustainably led brand, what do we know about our customers in terms of what they want to know about sustainability. So here are some suggested questions you could work with. So, for example, what are the attitudes of our customers towards sustainability, and what are their concerns around the environment? How aware are they about our sustainability efforts and those of our competitors? Because this, again, could be something that is obviously right for the planet and people, but obviously is an opportunity to provide competitive advantage if people are shifting over to brands with a more ethical focus. Other questions you might want to ask yourself are, how do our sustainability efforts affect our customer perception of our brand, with that in mind? And also, what do they want to know about our sustainability credentials? So, how transparent do we need to be about what we're actually trying to achieve? And it's also important, and it should be in any way, when we're talking about user design, is the behavior changes that we're likely to induce or sustain through the work that we do. So again, questions you can ask yourself during the design process are, what new habits do we create with our products and services that might impact the environment? And which of these new behaviors, or which of the behaviors that we're sustaining that currently exist, are going to harm or benefit the environment? And if we can find ones that are harming the environment, is there anything we can do to still deliver outcomes for the business and customers, but benefit the planet? So just to sort of put an example to that, if we think about transport, so mobility for people, here's a couple of options you as an individual have to get from point A to point B. So let's say we're in central London. One option is just to dial up an Uber and just wait for it to drive a few miles across city, sitting in traffic, waiting for it to reach us. And yes, it might be cheap and convenient, but there are that extra sort of journey miles that cars having to go through to get to us. Whereas there might be more convenient options right in front of us with no additional miles required, like a taxi or a bus or a tube, for example. So not to say that Uber's a bad thing, but just be mindful that there are new behaviors that are going to be induced, and what does that mean? If we look at Zipcars, which is a car sharing company, their model is slightly different. So they're still focusing on getting people from A to B in a car, but what they're now doing is through car sharing is enabling 20 privately owned cars to be taken off the road for every single Zipcar. So you're still able to provide mobility for people, but you can do it in a much more environmentally sound way. So yeah, you might not be able to change every behavior that you're inducing, but I think it's always worth being mindful, if you can, what are we doing and what the impact's going to be. So again, just to come back to our example of Sky and how they're working in this space. So as Mila mentioned earlier, in terms of new content that's being generated, Sky are producing new TV shows to help spread the word and putting content up on their website to tell people what they're doing about this, but also giving people, so that's customers and as well as staff, simple ways to make a difference. Because, again, it part of the solution is going to be down to individual changes. And if everyone can make a small difference, that equates to a real big positive difference overall. So again, it's worth engaging with the users to try and help induce positive behaviors if you can. So just to sort of put a bit more detail into that, on the left-hand side of the screen there, you can see what Sky are talking about in terms of how they're using their voice to communicate their message. And you also have the opportunity, if you can, to educate and inspire your users and customers, to help nudge them, raise awareness and nudge them in the direction of more environmentally focused behaviors. So, different questions you can ask yourself in terms of how you might go about doing it could be along the lines of, well, where do we get the message out? So is it through our digital content? Is it through social media and online campaigns? If we're producing physical products, do we have an opportunity to put that kind of messaging on our packaging? Etc, etc, etc. So all sorts of ways that you can just get the message out there as well, to help raise awareness with your customer base and also then demonstrate your sustainability credentials.
All right, so the next area that we're looking into now is redefining business models, services, and product propositions. And as Pete mentioned earlier, I think the most important bit is introducing the planet as a stakeholder in every business decision that we make. Let it be introducing a new service proposition or improving the current product offer. It doesn't matter. As long as the planet is considered, it is a good thing. If you're working on improving an existing service proposition, can you rethink of your current business model? For example, is there any way to move to a more circular business model? The example would be product life extension. We'll talk a bit more about it a bit later. I'll give some examples. Or for example, if you're working on a new service proposition or new digital product, for example, can you try a new business model to keep products in use for a longer time? And that could be an example of product as a service. We have a few examples to show you of how other big companies managed to transition to new sustainable business models, or managed to adopt more sustainable approaches in the way they do business. So I have two examples on this slide. The one on the left is HP, instant ink proposition. So it's the Internet of Things enabled subscription model for individuals or small businesses that increases cartridge recovery and recycling. So this is a proper circular economy model that uses connected printers to send customers replaced cartridges along with prepaid envelopes for returning used cartridges before the customer runs out of ink. So it's all automated, it's all interconnected. Subscribers to the service pay a monthly fee based upon a number of pages they print, not how much ink they buy, not how their printers operate, just on how many pages they pay. The other example of reinventing the existing business model and offering product as a service is selling light as a service. That's a new service which was developed, not service, but like they've improved the current service by Philips. So the intelligent lighting system allows Philips to retain the control over the items that they produce. And they're the ones maintaining reconditioning, doing the recovery. So basically, customers that they're using that light service, they don't need to worry about anything like maintaining or throwing away anything or replacing anything. Everything is managed by the service provider, which is Philips with this regards. And it's also everything automated. So customers pay only for kilowatts that they use, but they don't need to worry about any hardware or any software issues. So the question here for you to note is, what products in your company can you offer as a service when you can reshift the current model and twist the whole proposition? The other example which I like to talk about is a Chinese company called White Closet. It's a wardrobe in the cloud, and it's an example of the circular business model, another one. So it's online clothing subscription service that allows customers in China, mostly middle-class professionals who would love to show off a little bit and wear different clothes in the office. I mean, maybe not these days, but back when we're back to normal. But they don't have a budget for that because they're not Chinese multimillionaires. So they can't afford a big wardrobe. So the solution is that they can get that service and receive different batches of clothes, wear that, and return it back to White Closet when they will do dry cleaning and put it back in the cycle. So it's basically a renting clothes service. And using the digital technology, everything is automated, creates this circular business model, keeping clothes in use for longer and not producing any waste with buying and throwing the clothes that is no longer needed. Another example would be the product life extension or reverse cycle. So reverse logistic is a key building block in circular economy. So unfortunately, most brands still these days focus on the first sale of items, and they miss out on a really big opportunity of capturing additional value from the secondary market and also kind of deepening the engagement with their users at the same time. So this is an example of Patagonia, and the one the Patagonia that collaborated with a company called Trove when they managed to give Patagonia's second-hand clothes another chance. So you can actually head and go to Patagonia website and click on the one wear section of the website, and this is the place where you can sell from the Patagonian secondhand clothes, and it's like twice cheaper, but the quality is managed by Patagonia and guaranteed as Patagonia. So it's a great example. The question for you: how can you extend the life of your products, the companies that you're working for? And actually, this example leads nicely to the next area that we would like to cover, which is collaboration with other companies. And so the questions that I have here for you are the following. So how open are you and your company or your team or your department or you as individuals to collaborate with others, to collaborate with thought leaders in the field of sustainability, maybe research institutions, or maybe even competitors when designing new products or expanding your portfolio of services? And here we'd like to give like an example of a recent collaboration between Ocado and B Corporation. So they have just recently launched a new section on their website, which is EcoShop, which is the product which has been certified by B Corporation. And it's an amazing offering with the option to choose green products within different categories of thoughtful packaging, greener lifestyle, responsible content, fight for food waste. So great example of collaboration between two different brands. And of course, I'll use Sky here as well, because they're paying quite a lot of attention of collaborating with other business leaders, NGOs and policymakers in tackling the climate issue. And here is an example of the research collaboration between 9 media giants such as Sky, BBC, ITV, and the University of Bristol. There's a great research team there to create a tool that will accurately calculate carbon emissions, carbon emissions of digital media, because it's really, really hard to calculate, and Pete will talk about it later on. It's hard to measure. So this team with competing companies in the media area are now working on pioneering tool. It's due in 2021, so keep an eye on that space, because you never know, you might be able to apply this tool to the digital services of your company. So moving on, I think that's the block on the area which would be really close to your heart, because I believe most of us here are designers of different kinds. So how can we design with sustainability in mind? And I made quite a few references to the circular economy on previous slides. And I think this model is a good overview of different opportunities, actually 16 opportunities that we can consider when designing new products and services, not only products, but services as well. I put a link to the lady who created, there is a blog post on Medium, so you can dive into that and use it when you're working on new propositions. But basically, there's 4 areas with 4 elements in each of them. I'll just give you a few examples. In sources and manufacturing, there is a number of questions that you can work on in your design process. So upgrade, if we take upgrade as an example, instead of selling new products to your customers, can you help them only replace key components? How would customers understand if the part is broken and need replacement? Or longevity, the questions asked there would be, what kind of care, information, and maintenance you need to provide so that customers maximize the life of their products? Or packageless, can you buy in bulk, eliminate packaging? Example, distribution and use. We have share. So how many users share ownership of the product or use it on demand? Can we do anything of that kind? Or pay per use, those examples that I mentioned earlier when buying a slide as a service, or paying for the number of pages you printed instead of for buying cartridges. Or life extension, the repair. Are you offering customers an option options to repair the product? Are you directing them to the local communities where they can get the help with their repairments? Or can customers 3D print parts of your product? Or can you do that for them? So, and it goes on and on. So really great place to look for when you're working on the new service proposition. And back to our Sky example, they are working hard to make their tech products more efficient and sustainable and better for the planet. And here is their example of circular economy approach or circular design in this regards. So in redesigning Sky Plus HD box, the team used live circle assessment techniques to understand the environmental impact, greenhouse gas emissions across the life cycle of the whole product. So there are many things that we can look at here, but I've just picked up two, which I found quite interesting. So through the research, they determined that the customer use is the biggest CO2 contributor. Therefore, they introduced new features such as an automatic standby or eco mode saving. And another thing, to eliminate waste, they also added additional service, which is called doorstep exchange service, when customers can return anything from the Sky appliances, kits, any details that they don't need anymore back to the engineers when they come for installments or they come to fix the problem. So this is the principles that we looked earlier on of the circular design implemented with this an example of Sky HD box. Okay, that might be services and products, but what about digital products? How can we make our digital designs more sustainable? And there are a few ways how we can reduce digital waste. So one of them is, believe it or not, better UX and information architecture. So let your users complete their tasks as quick as possible and find the right information as fast as possible on your website or app or any other service that you provide digitally. That will reduce the really costly data and therefore will require less energy and create less pollution. Because as Pete mentioned earlier, digital products, digital services create quite a lot of waste, energy waste, and therefore pollution, especially if it's run not by renewable energy providers. The other areas that you might consider is lightweight design. So the one on the left, it's a current trend. Everyone goes black mode these days, but it's not only trendy, it's also good for the environment because black colors displays require less energy. The other thing is using less images or stop using high resolution images or uncompressed images. It is said that roughly 60% on average of the energy used on the website it's just because of the images, uncompressed ones. Also go for lighter fonts. For example, Raymond Eco is the lightest font available out there these days. And some more examples of the lightweight design, which is less harmful for the environment. Avoid heavy user interface designs such as ubiquitous carousels that require way too much energy. No autoplay videos, auto video previews, and also high definition, unnecessary high definition videos on smartphones, because anyway, you can't see the difference. So all those things will help to reduce the energy loss. And the last but not least, multiple pop-ups, sharing buttons, embedded maps, all that third-party content requires more energy. So if you can minimize that, that would be great. And another question I can throw into the air is, I know dynamic websites are really cool. They're great. There's so much like infinite scrolls and all these amazing scrolls that exist out there. But maybe very soon we'll have to go back to static designs and in order to save data for our planet.
Okay, so just to build on what Mila's been saying is that, there's a number of tools that we have in our toolbox as designers to try and minimize the carbon footprint of our designs. But making changes to your designs become much more meaningful when you can actually measure the difference you're making. What you'll find, though, is when you start to try and unpack that topic of measuring the carbon footprint of your designs, is that you'll realize that it becomes almost impossible to measure directly the amount of carbon dioxide attributed to what you're doing. So what we do have instead is some kind of useful proxies or next best options that we can measure. One of which is data transfer, which typically is measured in terms of kilowatts per gigabyte that we're having to transfer, and also the amount of carbon intensity of the electricity needed for that data transfer. And that will be typically measured in grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So between those two measures, we can get a sense of what we've created translates into carbon dioxide. But again, this is a tricky topic to discuss or to look into, because when you do start looking into, okay, well, what are typical figures that I can work with? You'll start to realize there's actually quite a lot of variety in terms of, say, data transfer. So, for example, are you measuring someone's first visit to your site where they've got to cache all the images, or is it their return visit and you don't have to worry about that anymore? Or are our servers powered off from wind farms, or are we getting the energy from a coal power plant, for example? So there's variation in all of that sort of stuff. So I guess our top tip to you guys would be just to make your life easier by using tools that are already available out there. And a couple that we've come across that we like are the website Carbon Calculator and EcoGrader. And so both of these give you information about any particular web page that you want to test in terms of what the carbon footprint is, but also actionable steps that you can go through to mitigate the carbon footprint, whether that's carbon offsetting, or say in terms of EcoGrader, you have more technical focused suggestions about what you can change about your website to improve its carbon footprint. So what's good about using these tools is one, they tell you what's going on. Two, they give you advice, but they give you a standardized way of measuring things. So you can always apply this same test to any changes that you make to see if you're making improvements. So it's worth bearing in mind that we're never going to reach a point where our digital products and services are going to emit no carbon, because if that's what we're aiming for, we might as well just switch the internet off, which I'm sure everyone's going to agree that that's not a great idea. So what we're actually aiming for is to minimize the carbon footprint of our products and services as much as we can, but at the same time, still make those products and services viable for our business and useful for our customers. So we can't necessarily sacrifice the needs of those other two stakeholders for the sake of just driving our carbon footprint down to zero. We need to find that happy balance, and whatever's left over, we're now into the territory of having to carbon offset anything that's left over. So again, carbon offsetting is a big topic we're not going to get into, but the website Carbon Calculator can help you with that. So what I recommend is, if you go after the webinar, or now if you fancy sharing, go and type in your homepage address, see what it comes up with, and then see what you can do in terms of carbon offsetting it if you need to. What we're going to move on to now in this penultimate section is talking about sustainable design maturity. So we've talked about sort of things that we can do as designers to make a difference. We've talked about what business leaders need to do in terms of business models and business operations need to do to make a difference. But none of that's going to happen really if your organization isn't in the right kind of space to make that change or to enable that change. And what we're talking about here is design maturity, or sustainable design maturity. And also what we're going to cover in this topic is how you can be a champion to push that agenda. So just to put a definition on it, we've borrowed this one from the International Standards Organization, which is an adapted definition of their definition for human-centered design. And what I think it translates quite nicely, because what we're talking about here is the level of understanding and implementing, and critically, the positive attitudes towards a systematic, sustainable design process within an organization. So culture is going to play a really big part in any kind of activities or sustainable activities you're going to try and make happen. So to try and maybe put a bit more perspective on that, here's a model that we can use to think about sustainable design maturity. Again, one that's been borrowed from a human-centered design domain, but again, applies equally well to any kind of dimension that you want to look at in terms of how an organization is functioning. And I'm not going to go into all the details of the different steps, but the kind of two key things to mention here basically are the opposite ends of the scale. So you could find yourself in a position where you're working with an organization that is totally indifferent to sustainable design, doesn't really know what it's about, or they might be sort of openly hostile towards the idea because it's going to kind of get in the way of business as usual. On the other end of the scale, you might be working with an organization that is pioneering sustainable design, and it's fundamentally embedded at the core of his operating model and business model, and obviously everything in between. And our goals as champions of sustainable design is to basically take our organizations wherever they are on that scale and push them as far over to the right as we can. And if they're even if they are on the far right of the scale, keep on pushing, just to still push as fast as we can and as hard as we can to make the changes that we need. So I guess our question for all of you guys today is, are you ready to be that champion within your organization to increase its sustainable design maturity? And hopefully you are, because as well as the bigger organizational level changes that need to be made, again, there's coming back to this idea of small differences collectively making a big impact. I think all of us as individuals within the design community have that option to try and drive that agenda and create like a snowballing effect where we just raise the enthusiasm, raise the engagement, and get people to buy into what we're trying to do. So how do we do that? So here are a few hints and tips for you guys to walk away with, which hopefully again will form a ready to go toolkit that you can take away and start applying in your next meeting. So tips for being a champion. The first one I'd recommend, or that we would recommend, is establishing trust and build relationships with stakeholders. Now, this will apply in any instance when you're trying to increase change within an organization. But I've heard this a lot where people have been talking about trying to increase like UX buy-in within organizations. And again, I think it's equally applicable when we're talking about sustainable design. So a few pointers around this are finding out what people's needs and pain points are in terms of their role and maybe their longer career progression, and work out how your sustainable design activities can help them achieve their goals. And also crucially understand how their experiences and activities can shape your work so you can work in partnership with each other. And if you can form those strong bonds, you then have the opportunity to get that sustainable design work done and then start demonstrating the benefits of it. And what we'd recommend is start with the people that you're interacting with now, that you regularly interact with, that you have the regular conversations and you have good relationships already. So you can just go for some quick wins and then widen your sphere of influence as you go. Other tips would be just to simply introduce and champion sustainable activities and tools and deliverables if you can. So this might include things like running seminars about sustainable design and its benefits. Introduce the voice of environment throughout the project. So anytime you're having meetings about what you're going to do about design, as long as your user personas, for example, you could introduce the voice of the environment as well. And if you have the time and the resources and it's the right thing to do, or there's an opportunity to make a difference through sustainable design, just go ahead and do it. It's easy, I know that's easy to say, not as easy to do, but if you think there's an opportunity, right, there's a definite benefit I can bring to a project here, I'll just do this extra step once to demonstrate the value and provide myself with a case study to then go and sort of fight for more budget, resources, etc. later down the line. That then sort of leads on to this topic of demonstrating the value of sustainable design. So again, this could be things like sharing high-level insights with your stakeholders or the wider organization, creating case studies to showcase the impact. If we get the opportunity, or even if you could do this, digitally, showcase your work in communal areas, like if you've got a Slack channel open or on Teams or whatever. And, and even if you don't broadcast this necessarily to the wider organization to start with, you could work towards establishing sustainable design objectives and metrics to measure the return on investment of your work. So it might be reduced waste or increased efficiency or a whole other range of ways in which sustainable design will benefit your business and your customers. And then once you've got some measurements, you can then take it to the business and say, oh, look at all the good work we're doing. Can we have some more resources to work harder on this, please? And then finally, and this is a really big important part, as it is with any kind of project, collaborate with stakeholders. So again, holding kickoff meetings and have progress meetings at the key points with all the key representatives from whoever's going to be delivering this product and service. And that will give you the opportunity to bring up that conversation about sustainable design and get it on everyone's radar. You can do other things like run sustainable design workshops or invite stakeholders to observe user research sessions. So if you're going to be doing some interviews with customers and to ask them what they think about sustainability, get some people to come along and observe the session so they get to hear it and get more invested in the topic. And again, when the time is right, you know, it might be, again, a case co-located with project team members, so you get that close working relationship with people. It's another great opportunity to then bring up the conversation of sustainable design and, again, get it in people's minds. So moving on to some more specific resources that you can, that will help you do all that sort of stuff, because, again, no sense in reinventing the wheel. There are a number of sustainable design tools available online. A lot of them are for free, so you can go to any of these 3 websites, and there are open tool repositories you can dip into. So we suggest you go and have a look at those, see which ones will work for you, maybe have a go at try some out on your next project and see how you get on with them. There are also, I mean, you may find yourself, you're the only person in the organization that's trying to push this agenda, and you want maybe some support from outside your organization to figure out how to, you know, get things going. Well, fortunately, there are plenty of online community groups and forums, etc., where like-minded people, like all of us here today, can go and engage with other people on this topic to try and solve challenges, work about improving business processes, etc. So again, we recommend checking out these 3 options and having a Google of this sort of stuff yourself. I know that the climate designers are having a conference, I think, in the next few days about tackling sustainable design. So if it hasn't happened already, I'd suggest signing up to that, because it looks like a really good conference. So that's been a very sort of whistle-stop tour, and we've talked a lot. So I appreciate all of you for sticking around through to the end. What we'd like to do now is invite sort of questions from you guys, if there have been any. But we'll also, what I'm going to do before we move on to that is do a shameless plug at this point for a couple of things we wanted to mention. So firstly, as Mila mentioned earlier in the beginning of the presentation today, that we do a wide range of training courses covering the entire extent of the design process. All of them remote at the moment, so there's easy access for anybody. And we're doing a deal on our training course at the moment. So if you're in the market for some UX training, then feel free to drop us a line and make the most of that offer. We also have another shout out for our recruitment company called Bunnyfield. And any of you that have ever been involved in participant recruitment before will know that it can be a right pain in the neck to get it right. So we're fortunate enough at Bunnyfoot to have our own in-house team called Bunnyfield, who tackle all this for us and do a really excellent job of it. So again, if you're looking to do some user testing or user research at any point soon, I would very much recommend dropping Bunnyfield a line, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you out. So thank you guys all for listening. Let's just check out the Q&A to see if anyone has actually asked any questions.
Yeah, there is like a big, not a big question, like the one which summarized, I've seen in the chat as well. A few people posted in the chat the question about measuring the impact of your digital tools, which are not browser based. The examples are the software like Sketch, or for example, measuring the environmental impact of apps. So regarding the Sketch, I think Sketch have their own data on how dirty or clean they are. So for the tools like this, as far as I remember, you can actually find out that information on their website. As for the apps, I know that there is a lot of development, but I'm not aware of any ways to track the app so far. I don't know, maybe you, Pete, came across anything for measuring the environmental impact of apps. But so far, I haven't seen any tools to use that for the apps.
No, I haven't personally either. But what I would suggest from a broader perspective in terms of suppliers, if you're not sure, go and ask them. Because what you'll generally find is people that are sustainability focused will be quite happy to tell you all about it, because they want people to know about it. So if you find that your suppliers aren't able to provide you with that answer, push it back to them and say, well, we'd like to know, because this is going to inform a part of whether we decide to renew our license with you or not. So I think that you know, we need to, if, you know, if we're working for organizations that take sustainability seriously, you know, the supply chain has to be part of that. And as we know from people like Apple, for example, you know, they're looking to go net zero across all their supply chain in the coming years. You know, so if you, you know, I think it's worth, you know, putting that on your suppliers' agenda as well, so they can come back to you with some answers.
Yes, and the CDP list and the big corporation is the ones which we mentioned before, but obviously there's big companies that are listed there. Maybe for the smaller ones, indeed, it's the direct contact. Make it clear for you whom you're working with. Is there any sustainability guidelines? Well, as far as we are aware of, companies create their own guidelines, and there are a lot of teams and on different levels, for example, UX and UI guidelines. There are books to read on like making sustainable digital products, but like as a guideline, universal one, not yet, maybe on its way. So far, like we are doing our own one, and we know that some of our clients are doing their own ones and using already and implementing. But the things that some of the examples that we've mentioned on our slides, that's part of it. Like everyone is tackling it, like making the designs lighter and making services more circular.
Yeah, and I think Mila's point about each company having their own is an important one to make, you know, to state, because again, sustainable design is going to have to fit into all of the other aspects of the design work that you do. So, you know, in terms of like, how does it fit in with branding, etc., blah, blah, blah. So I think it's useful to maybe take some of the generic things that we've suggested, like the models and the methods, and go and have a look at those open toolkits to see if you can just lift something off the shelf and customize it for your own need. But I think what it'll also involve is, if you want to create guidelines that are specific for your organization, then you'll have to sit down with your team and other stakeholders maybe and figure out, well, what does that mean for us? You know, because I mean, you might be doing digital, physical, a mixture of both. You know, what does a sustainable design look like from our perspective? And you can build, like you would do with, say, branding guidelines or visual design guidelines, specific guidelines for yourself as well. But hopefully what we've given you today is some food for thought to maybe provide the foundation for what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, there is a question. We are running like a bit over the time, but there was a question in the chat area of from David Little. We're encouraged to design for delight and engagement with our products and services. Should we be actively pushing back on this? Is it realistic? More engagement, more use of tech? That's a tricky question to use. It's like you put on the weights, more engagement or less waste and energy waste. I think it's quite a high level question. I think in more specific when depending on what you're doing, because there's many ways to engage with users, there are many ways to bring delights. So I think it's just on that specific individual level. You need to maybe discuss with your teams and put everything on the plate, and then discussing because you can present sustainability as a delight to many users. A lot of users these days would be pleased to know that instead of doing that extra thing, you explain and you're open and transparent about it, that we're not doing that because we think it's bad for the environment. We know that would be an extra thing that you will enjoy, but you know what? We think planet is more important. Not more important, okay, you can't say that, but you can kind of explain, and I'm sure a lot of users will understand that, will appreciate that. Okay, there would be less convenience in a way, like for example, with no plastic bags, which were used so convenient in supermarkets. Now you need to bring your own bag or pay extra. So I think the mind for the majority of the users is already there. It's just a matter how you communicate it and how you present it. And you can twist it and make it a delight, an extra benefit.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth not trying to fall into the trap of efficiency gains buying us room for other things that might not be sort of ideal. So, I mean, in terms of the delighters and the engagement, I mean, I guess, you know, they aren't inherently bad things, but I guess as with anything that you're trying to, I suppose anything you're trying, metric, let's say, that you're trying to improve upon, you kind of need to be mindful, I suppose, why are we trying to achieve that, and does it make sense to do so? So we have been fortunate in the fact that technology, the efficiency of technology has got greater and greater and greater, but what that's led to is, you know, sloppier design, because the tech's there to cope with lazy, well, maybe lazy is a harsh way of putting it, but inefficient design. So I think there's still room for providing delight and increasing engagement, but as one of the comments is in the chat here, just being simpler and more meaningful, so we can again be smart about how we're designing things, so there is still that win-win. But I think, yeah, we don't want to fall in the trap of relying on tech to bail us out of this problem. We need to kind of take control and do the right thing and do it in the right way. So I think we are running a few minutes over, but I think we'll answer one last question that's coming from Sam. But just as a heads up, if you haven't seen it in the chat or the Q&A section, just to let everyone know that we have recorded the webinar. So if you're welcome to get a copy of the recording if you want to. Just get in touch with Jo, who's you've been in touch with already, to get your ticket to the event, and she'll be able to sort you out. But just to look at that last question from Sam. So do we need to resist net zero framing, as it allows or encourages split exclusives to rely on offsetting rather than changing business as usual? So yes, I mean, I guess to that point I was trying to make, you know, we can't rely on, say, technology or carbon offsetting or whatever that's going to be to dig us out the hole. You know, I suppose a metaphor that we can think about in terms of this respect is, let's imagine we were filling up a sink, and the taps are representing the amount of carbon that we're putting into the environment, and the plug hole, if it's open, is going to be drawing carbon out. So the plug represents carbon offsetting, carbon drawdown, efficiency gains we can get, and the taps are obviously implementing the amount of carbon we're putting in. So you know, what we need to basically do, that there's no point we need to try and turn the taps off as well as plug the hole, basically. So we don't have to rely on just carbon offsetting and just think, oh yeah, we can just produce as much carbon as we want, because we'll plant a load of trees, we'll trim off some videos from our website and it'll be fine. We need to be doing everything, basically. So try and be more efficient with design work, carbon offset whatever you need to address the balance. But yeah, don't kind of slip into complacency and thinking carbon offset is the solution. You can just carry on doing what you're doing, because that's just going to require more trees, which, as we probably know, are hard enough to plant as it is, because, you know, government policies, etc., etc. That's a rant for another day. But anyways, yeah, the answer is yeah, we can take control of trying to be more efficient and reduce our carbon footprint.
Yeah, and just like a small addition, maybe using the metaphor as well. We used in the previous presentation the approach of doing the right thing versus doing the thing right. So doing the right thing is what you're doing to avoid pollution, to avoid energy loss, and doing the things right, that's all the other things that you can do, like offsetting. Like, at least in my mind, I see that what is the priority? The priority is doing the right thing with your everyday work versus offsetting and just trying to cover up the bad stuff which is happening. Yeah. So there's been a lot of thanks. Thank you everyone for appreciating our webinar. And yeah, I think on my behalf, I'll just wish everyone to stay sustainable and to be the champions in the work that you do on a daily basis, without waiting for the decisions somewhere upstairs.
Let's go make the change. Let's go make the change.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone, and hope to see some of you soon. Please stay connected. Can we show? Yeah. Oops. Sorry, that's the one. Get in touch. Stay connected. We'd be more than happy to hear back from you. Don't run away. If you have any questions, come back to us.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Have a nice afternoon.
Bye-bye.